On this Saturday night, the fallout from a disastrous Oval Office meeting.
You don't have the cards. You're buried there.
The president of Ukraine now in the UK.
You have full backing across the United Kingdom.
As shockwaves from that fiery exchange with Trump continue to be felt around the world.
That was atrocious behavior.
The historic deal to protect nature. The billions in funding which will now flow for biodiversity. And the party that's keeping Montrealers up all night. How Nuit Blanche is set to illuminate arts and culture across the city.
Global National. Reporting tonight, Carolyn Jarvis.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. A day after a heated Oval Office meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump, Volodymyr Zelenskyy is back in Europe, where heads of state are rallying behind the Ukrainian leader. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer embraced Zelenskyy outside 10 Downing Street moments before expressing Britain's unwavering support for Ukraine. It's a starkly different scene from the extraordinary exchange that played out in front of cameras at the White House just a day ago. Zelenskyy says he has also secured a meeting with King Charles while in London. And tomorrow he will meet with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and other leaders at a Ukraine security summit. Vincent McAvenny joins us from London with more. Vincent.
Carolyn, President Zelenskyy met with British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer this evening here at number 10 Downing Street after what has been a whirlwind 24 hours. Greeted with a hug, not just a handshake after a bruising trip to Washington.
As you heard from the cheers on the street outside, you have full backing across the United Kingdom. And we stand with you, with Ukraine, for as long as it may take.
We count on your support, and really, we're really happy that we have such partners and such friends.
Even underlining that support with a new loan agreement insured by frozen Russian assets worth over 4 billion Canadian dollars. Friday's Oval Office meeting has led headlines everywhere. Instead of securing the foundation of a ceasefire with a minerals deal, Zelenskyy was publicly scolded by the US president and ejected empty-handed from the White House. In Russia, the exchange was played out in full, with presenters talking of a diplomatic train wreck and a public political execution. No word yet from President Putin, who likely enjoyed what President Trump called great TV. In Kyiv, Ukrainians are alarmed and upset.
It looked like fighting a hoodlum from the block, like in a Godfather movie. Kiss the ring. If you don't, get out.
I think that Zelenskyy defended our position as a Ukrainian nation. Despite the pressure that was put on him, that was most likely planned before his arrival.
Americans visiting Germany expressed their embarrassment.
That was atrocious behavior on the behalf of the United States president yesterday and the vice presidents against a man that we should be very supportive of.
Western leaders have been almost unanimous in their support of President Zelenskyy today. Many of them are making their way to London for Sunday's emergency summit. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will join them here in London tomorrow to discuss what, if anything, can be done to calm this row and secure a peace deal. If they don't, then Ukraine and Europe are facing the very real question of how long they might be able to repel Russia's advance without US military aid. Carolyn?
Vincent McAvenny in London, thank you. That tense exchange between Trump, J.D. Vance and Zelenskyy is overshadowing the reality on the ground, where the war continues with no end in sight. Tonight, more missiles and bombs fell, including one on a hospital in Ukraine. Nathaniel Dove reports on why the fighting could actually get worse before a peace deal is reached.
The sounds of a heavy Russian strike on Odessa. On the same night, Russia attacked a Kharkiv hospital.
If you didn't have our military equipment.
The focus has been on the clash in the White House, not Zaporizhia or Kyiv, but the war is still very much raging.
So what we really see, it is the intensification of the drones attacks. Up to 200 drones each night are just around Ukraine.
This military analyst says Russia and Ukraine are fighting harder now to have a stronger position at the negotiating table with the U.S. As for America's allies, a chorus of support for Ukraine.
This is
the struggle of a democratic nation versus an authoritarian regime led by Vladimir Putin.
Germany's foreign minister saying the Oval Office clash shows we're in a heinous time and must defend the rules-based international order.
When they're turning their back on, this whole fighting for democracy, it's super upsetting to see.
The connection between Kyiv and Washington is strained, not severed, experts say. But questions now about whether the U.S. will keep supporting Ukraine or if the burden falls to Europe.
Unfortunately, without the U.S., it would be extremely difficult. None of the European countries would be able to supplement this.
Experts warn what happens if the States withholds its missiles.
One of the initial ways in which we're going to see this will be more civilian casualties as Russia bombs Ukrainian cities.
In the hours before Zelenskyy and Trump sparred, Ukrainians paid their respects to Ethan Hertwig.
He was an American that stood for freedom, no matter where it was, whether it was Ukraine or wherever he could go to help, he was going to answer the call.
Who didn't ask what Ukraine could do for him, but what he could do for a country fighting for its life. What happens to that country now looks more uncertain. Nathaniel Dove, Global News, Toronto.
To other news now, and there are some positive signs about the Pope's health. Doctors in Rome are saying the 88-year-old spent long periods off a mechanical breathing device. This comes after the Pope suffered another respiratory crisis on Friday. Outside the Pope's hospital, a group of well-wishers gathered to send thoughts of a speedy recovery. So far today, the Pope has not had any other breathing spasms. He's also reported to be eating without assistance. An historic deal to safeguard nature was reached in Rome this week. Delegates at the UN Biodiversity Conference, known as COP16, resumed talks which fell apart last fall, finally reaching an agreement in the early morning hours. Neetu Garcha has the details.
Oil spills are devastating marine habitats around the world. In California, these sea lions were poisoned by toxic algae, while in the Philippines, a recent oil spill threatened the livelihood of local fishermen and endangered marine species. And with the threat of a rapid decline of biodiversity, there's a new glimmer of hope for species like this.
I see no request for the floor, so is it adopted?
In Rome, negotiators secured a historic agreement this week. It's aimed at halting and reversing the accelerating loss of biodiversity. COP16 talks wrapped up with countries agreeing to raise $200 billion annually by 2030.
We want to protect 30% of land and sea globally for nature by 2030. Often it's more profitable to exploit our natural resources than it is to protect and restore them.
Scenes like this, at least 120 river dolphins found dead in the Amazon during severe drought and rising temperatures, are becoming too common.
I think our mission is clear. We must protect nature.
In the face of growing environmental challenges, including a 73% decline of wildlife populations since 1970, according to the World Wildlife Fund, the focus is on providing the financial foundation needed to protect and restore ecosystems.
In this very polarized, fragmented, divisive, and conflictive geopolitical landscape we have an important responsibility here in Rome.
The talks held against the backdrop of significant geopolitical shifts, including reductions in development aid from the U.S., which didn't answer questions on why it didn't send representatives to the talks. Some delegates voiced frustration over the agreement's lack of a clear path to actually securing the resources needed, and doubt about the urgency of the current efforts to truly change the course for biodiversity before it's too late. Neetu Garcha, Global News, Vancouver.
In the Middle East, there are renewed concerns fighting may resume in Gaza as talks for the next phase of the Israel-Hamas ceasefire deal stall. Despite the widespread devastation, Palestinians came together to mark the first day of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. This, as the first phase of the Gaza ceasefire deal comes to an end. Hamas has reportedly rejected an Israeli proposal to extend the first stage of the agreement, saying it goes against the original truce. Ontario Premier Doug Ford won an historic third consecutive majority government Thursday night, with a cornerstone of his campaign that he's the leader to take on Trump and potential tariffs. So what lessons does Ford's big win have for the upcoming federal election? A race where the latest polling from Ipsos shows a tightening between the Liberals and Conservatives. David Akin joins me now. David, what are the takeaways for the federal Conservatives?
Well, I think there's two takeaways, Carolyn, about Ford's big win. The first one is this. The Ford PCs for the last two elections have been working hard to build a new voter coalition that includes private sector unionized workers, and it's paid off. The Ford PCs were getting endorsement after endorsement from private sector unions, and Pierre Poilievre, the Conservatives, have been doing that for 2 years on shop floors, factories, in mines, in mills, looking for, again, the private sector union vote. So this will be validation for the Poilievre Conservatives that that's something Conservatives can do, and that kind of goes towards eating the NDP lunch. Now, the other thing, of course, that Ford did in this campaign, he wrapped himself in the flag. He was Captain Canada. He was there, as he said, every day on the campaign trail to protect Canadian workers, protect Ontario workers, to stand up for Trump. Here's the thing. It looks like that is not a bad strategy because Ford clearly differentiated himself from everybody else, and Ontarians said, yeah, Ford is that guy. It's not so clear at the federal level. We've had some polling out from our polling partner Ipsos this week that says Canadians are largely split. They do see Poilievre as potentially standing up to Trump, but they think that a Mark Carney could as well. So that is the big federal implication, I think, for the Ford win. The Captain Canuck angle, and look at those private sector unionized workers moving into the Conservative coalition.
So, David, what does this say about the Liberal and NDP brands?
Well, I'm going to start with the NDP first, and the provincial NDP polling in third place and yet came out as the official opposition. The NDP squeezed every last ounce of votes to get the seats they had. And that's got to be good news for the federal NDP. It's all about ground game and working the vote. So that's the one side. As for the Liberals, there still is a Liberal brand, I guess. That is the important thing. Of course, the Liberals became an official party status in the Queen's Park legislature after 8 years of not being so. So the Liberals are still alive and kicking. And, of course, that mirrors on the federal polls where we've seen resurgence on the federal Liberals. So I guess that's the takeaway. The point is, for whatever campaign we're getting into a month, with the resignation of Trudeau, the belligerence of Donald Trump, and now the apparent arrival of Mark Carney, and we'll see how that goes, that has really changed the whole federal political picture. Here in Ontario, things very much the same they were 4 years ago. Carolyn.
David Akin, thank you. Well, no matter who leads the federal government, they'll have a lot on their plate, from Trump's tariffs to inflation, issues that have also left many Canadians concerned about their retirement, even forcing some to delay it. As Kyle Benning reports, the increasing cost of living has chipped away at savings for some that were meant for the golden years.
This is not where Diane Clark expected to spend her 75th birthday. As much as she enjoys playing cards with friends, Diane had a different idea of what her retirement would look like.
We don't travel anymore. We don't buy as good of food as we used to buy, basically. And we stick around home a lot.
The 2008 financial crisis, coupled with post-COVID-19 pandemic inflation, limited retirement lifestyles. This week, CIBC released a survey that found 2/3 of Canadians say the increased cost of living is hampering retirement plans. Financial planners calling for soon-to-be retirees to get their ducks in a row.
Look at an actual budget, and part of that budget should include, of course, retirement savings and making sure that we're taking advantage of all the different registered plans.
The survey also found 7 in 10 expect to have a phased retirement, with the expectation of working after 65.
They're absolutely terrified about outliving their savings and becoming a burden on their family.
It has organizations like CARP, the Canadian Association of Retired Persons, calling for changes to legislation of RRSPs. Ottawa has a mandatory withdrawal at age 71, which CARP says forces some seniors who are still working to receive income that would benefit them later in life. The National Institute on Aging also found 90% of Canadians start receiving their Canada Pension Plan at or before they turn 65. But experts say if you can, delaying the start of that benefit is a far better option.
And if you wait from age 60 to age 70,
you'll more than double this pension, which is guaranteed for life. It's inflation indexed, and it's basically, it's a great deal when you do the math.
Seniors like Diane sending out a warning to be fully prepared given the increase in life expectancy.
Save way more money than we did and invest differently.
So your golden years can remain as such. Kyle Benning, Global News, Toronto.
Canada's flu season is peaking, so why aren't people rolling up their sleeves? Coming up, the missed opportunity, according to doctors, as the virus spreads across the country. In health news, Canada's flu season is peaking. This year's peak is happening several months later than the past two flu seasons. 27% of people tested for the flu are positive. That's the highest rate in 4 years. As of February 22nd, widespread infections were reported in 3 provinces. Well, getting the flu shot can offer some protection, especially for seniors and those with a high risk of complications. But as Catherine Ward explains, fewer Canadians are rolling up their sleeves.
The key here is the vaccine.
Data shows many Canadians did not get a flu shot this season, and vaccine uptake is down compared to last season. In the last influenza season, 28% of people in BC got the flu shot. As of February 15th of this year, that number sits at 25%. Alberta's coverage went from 24 to 20% in the same time frame. Manitoba's saw a decline from 25% to 23%, and Nova Scotia's fell from 29% to 26%. Epidemiologist Dr. Christopher Labos says these numbers show a missed opportunity for protection.
It does appear from the preliminary data that the flu vaccine this year has a roughly 50% effectiveness. And that's pretty good, because if you can cut the number of flu cases by half, then that really helps ease the burden on our healthcare system.
Even small changes can have a significant impact.
A small drop in vaccine coverage in the at-risk individuals can have a dramatic impact in not only the number of people who experience severe disease, but tragically the number of lives we lose in Canada to influenza.
Dr. Karim Ali says he's seen firsthand how having a flu shot can be a game changer for those who do end up getting sick.
Influenza vaccine may not prevent you from getting influenza, but it certainly can help alleviate or not progress to severe illness where people end up seeking hospital care or end up in the ICU.
It's important to remember the flu can be deadly. Last season, more than 240 people died. The flu season is expected to last into April, so if you haven't rolled up your sleeves, doctors say there's still time and benefit to getting a flu shot. Carolyn?
Catherine Ward in Toronto, thank you. Ahead, risky business. The wild ride for 2 window washers left dangling from a New York City high-rise.
Wow, it's spinning like crazy right now.
These 2 window washers in New York City were hanging on for dear life, dangling some 78 stories above ground. Their scaffolding became loose in high winds and started spinning out of control, repeatedly crashing into the side of the building, littering the sidewalk below with glass. Luckily, they were eventually rescued by the city's fire department and are expected to be okay. In northern India, at least 4 members of a construction crew are dead and several others are missing after being buried by an avalanche. It happened Friday near a mountain pass on the Tibet border. The Indian Army has been leading search and rescue efforts. So far, 50 workers buried under deep snow and debris have been saved. In southern Serbia, tens of thousands rallied against the government after a deadly train station collapse. There have been months of similar mass demonstrations nationwide after the roof of the station collapsed last November. 15 people died in that accident that many are blaming on poor infrastructure and government corruption. Next, the party keeping Montrealers up until the early morning hours. The first Nuit Blanche took place in Paris in 2002. It was created to showcase contemporary art in public spaces. In English, it translates to White Night or Sleepless Night. And tonight, people in Montreal have a chance to join the party. Global's Phil Carpenter got an early start on the celebrations.
It's my birthday!
Hayley Griffin is preparing herself for what some insist is the best night of the year in Montreal.
Last year we had 200,000 people.
It's the 22nd edition of Nuit Blanche, when Montrealers and visitors alike converge in droves in different areas of the city. It's part of the 2-week-long festival on Volodymyr, which ends March 9th.
And it's like, a great night out where you can enjoy Montreal culture, Montreal food, Montreal music, Montreal poetry.
Several venues, including museums, many restaurants and bars, will be open all night.
I think it's cool. I think I'm going to come. Nothing else to do, and it's free, and it sounds awesome. Art, music, activities.
Gastronomy is one of the main aspects of Nuit Blanche. And this year, once again, international chefs are in town.
To meet with chefs from here, and they're cooking together, like very special, special foods. And it's like Michelin stars type of chefs.
One restaurant which will be open until 6 a.m. Sunday is the Darling Bar on the Plateau. Executive Chef Alejandro Vega says events like Nuit Blanche are a boon for the business community.
There's a lot of people coming to town and in the area, so we expect a really big night.
Ordinary folks who normally would be tempted to cocoon on a winter night say they are looking forward to getting out, especially after the big snowstorm a week ago.
When the snow melted, I realized I hadn't been outside in like 2 weeks, Well, I'd been outside, but not to just enjoy life, so.
She and others stress it is good to be out. Montreal is a winter city, after all. Phil Carpenter, Global News, Montreal.
And that is Global National for this Saturday night. I'm Carolyn Jarvis. Tonight's Air Canada is the Three Sisters Mountains near Canmore, Alberta. We love to see Air Canada. Please email them to globalnational@globalnews.ca. Thanks for watching. Hope you'll join us again tomorrow. Have a great night.